So it will be just me, because the presentation is so short, so one guy is enough. So we will talk about location-based augmented reality games, and this presentation seems to be a continuation to the previous one, because I think a lot of people that actually work with augmented reality have similar insights, so hopefully you will learn something new here. And at Stack of Joy, we're always trying to figure out new ways to make immersive games and innovate gameplay with technology, with interesting visuals, or anything that is new and hasn't been seen before. And augmented reality, like 5 or 6 years ago, was something really, really new. And we started back then, and it was so interesting that we decided to make a location-based game. And why make AR games at all? Well, projections are obvious, and with Apple introducing their AR kit and Google introducing their AR core, I think these projections are quite realistic. So there will be a huge install base in a few years, and I think next year will be the breakthrough for augmented reality games. So to introduce the topic, let's check out a project that we have actually made and released, which is a location-based augmented reality game. So let's watch a short video. So as you can see, well, I guess every speaker that has experience with augmented reality game always raises questions in the audience. Why is it so similar to Pokemon Go? So we'll get back to that. Although I won't answer the question, but I will explain the situation a bit. So the true mobility of a smartphone device enables having actual augmented reality and location-based tracking and stuff like that, because devices can be physically carried anywhere, and if we add a GPS sensor to it, we get location awareness. If we rotate device to any direction and we have a camera, gyro, compass, and other sensors, we get augmented reality. And by using those technologies, we can have fun and engaging games. And so that's why mobile is perfect for augmented reality games, and especially location-based augmented reality games. And there are only a few proper augmented reality games on the store. There are not many popular games at all, and that's because most of them are just gimmicks, not actual good, real games. And that is because it's difficult to properly integrate those features into gameplay, both technically and gameplay-wise, and it's a bit challenging. So you have to shift your thinking and think about augmented reality from the beginning of designing the game, not by adding it on top of existing gameplay moves or something like that. So how can we actually use augmented reality in a game? So you always need to find the middle ground between innovation, so adding a lot of new stuff that players haven't seen before, and something between the existing techniques, so games that are recognizable and people know how to play them. So both of those, well, existing techniques are good, but you always need to look for something new to have players engaged. But you cannot add a lot of new stuff because players will just subconsciously reject the game. So let's see how we did it with Monster Buster. So to start talking about the game, I have to say that it was released in 2014 on Windows Phone. It was a very experimental game, it was quite a small game, but it was very popular on Windows Phone. On all platforms, after releasing it on Android and iOS in 2017, actually this summer, it already has more than 1 million downloads, and it's one of the best rated and most popular RPG games on Windows Phone. So, well, it kind of proves that the game was well delivered, it was well designed from scratch, and the augmented reality and location-based parts were used quite well. And how did it start? It started with an initial idea that we need to create a monster fighting and collecting game in the real world. And there were different ways to use augmented reality and location. So how much of that should we use in this game? And there were 3 steps that could use this technology. So walking around with the camera on with directions on the screen is one option. Then finding a monster and engaging it in augmented reality is the other. And actually fighting in the augmented reality view is the third one. And all of them has challenges. So if you constantly walk with a camera on and you have to look around with the camera while walking, your arms get tired, your battery gets drained, so that is not very user-friendly. Finding monsters and engaging them in augmented reality is also questionable due to the quality of augmented reality, but well, because it drifts and it can sometimes have bad recognition of the camera view and so on. Although this one is much better with ARKit and with AR Core. And the third step is fighting in AR, which is also very challenging because the arms also will get tired if you hold the phone for like 2 or 5 minutes. And you cannot move while fighting a monster, so if you found the monster, you have to stand there for at least a few minutes, and we think that this is not very good. So we decided to only use a map for the first one, not actual augmented reality. So you can turn the map on, you can put it in a pocket and just keep walking. You don't need to have the camera on all the time. For the second one, we introduced monster portals. So they are floating around in these kind of spherical portals. So if they drift a little, that is not a problem anymore. If they were standing on the ground, it would be weird if they started floating around. So we kind of went around this problem and just decided to actually use augmented reality in this step. And fighting in augmented reality, we think, is not very good due to the points I've mentioned, so we just introduced a virtual arena. So this is how it looks. We have a map. When we are close enough, we see a monster in augmented reality. We engage it and go to a virtual arena where we can play in turn-based fights like in usual turn-based games. So when you actually fight a monster, you can keep going and you don't have to stand in one spot for a long time. And other things that can be introduced, so that were mostly technical and physical features that have to be taken into account. But there are also gameplay features like narrative, world persistence, engagement, and so on. So let's look into those. So there are in augmented reality and especially location-based games, there are real-world locations and objects. So there are parks, lakes, and other stuff, contextual data that you can use that was spoken about in the previous presentation. There is a real-world time, so you cannot speed it up or slow it down. You have to actually take into account how much time has passed and how much time does it take to, for the player to walk to a specific location and so on. And real-world weather, that can be a challenge, but that can also be a feature if you use weather as a feature in your game. And people, of course. They're actual people. Those are not virtual NPCs or something like that. So there are anonymity issues that, for example, Pokemon Go had, and you have to take that into account. So talking about narrative, classical MMO and RPG games can have quests, they can have cinematics and dialogues, they can have world building and population, so creatures and environments, details and stuff like that. And media external to the game, which is like the press and trailers and images and descriptions of the game on the website and somewhere else. So all of those things are used in classical MMO games. So can we use them in augmented reality games? They are all possible to use, but you have to, again, shift your thinking. So quests, yes, they can be used, but they have to be designed differently because the player is playing in a real world, not in a virtual world. So there is time, location, weather, and other things that have to be taken into account when designing quests. But it also brings new possibilities. So, for example, you can ask for a player to defeat a monster, or find something else near a lake, or during rain, or at night, or something like that. And cinematics and in-game dialogue, yes, they can also be used, but they should be a bit different as well. So they have to be convincing and engaging. So if you're displaying something in the real world, that limits you a bit. But you can still use that. So for example, if you find a character, they can talk to you, they can give you a quest or something like that. So that is possible. But you have to think about the player as usual. And world and population, so this is a bit more challenging, but you can still add details to the world, not only characters. So there can still be some kind of NPCs and stuff like that, but you have to think about that before starting to design the game. And media external to the game, yes, that is absolutely possible, because you can have trailers, you can have additional images, stories on your website, and so on. And what we did for at least this version of the game is we introduced quests and kind of a storyline for different monsters and locations. So we introduced some physical places that you can travel around, and if you go to each place you find a monster, and if you find all of them you get a reward. We also have stories like the Slender story in the second line. So for example, it says Slender is a night creature, so defeat 6 enemies between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And that is quite interesting, and it's also a bit challenging if you don't walk around at night. But if you want a reward, you will just go out for a few minutes and complete this challenge. World persistence is a bit challenging because players have to move around and actually travel to locations. So characters and objects cannot be too far from the initial position of the player, and players are very different. So in the same location, there can be a complete noob and a pro in the game. So you cannot have all the same objects, all the same characters with the same level and equally advanced. because an advanced player will be able to defeat them, but a new player will not be able to do that. So you need to account for the level of the player and their location, and maybe generate a higher level enemy for a higher level player and a lower level enemy for lower level players, and so on. And communal play is where players meet other players. So, well, the real world becomes a map of the game, and you can meet other people. And, well, that can be challenging for games like this, because if unwanted people attract kids and other people to specific locations, then that's not good, because, well, we know all the problems that that raises. So you have to somehow maybe differentiate what different players see, maybe not show their names or even their characters, but you can also use that in a game. So be very careful, and then it will be possible. And also engagement. So not all people like to walk, so you have to take that into account. And even the people that like to walk, they have to. They sometimes don't want to because it's raining or it's cold outside. So what we did, for example, is introduce a quick fight mode, which doesn't need AR at all. You can play at home, but you will not be able to unlock new monsters. You will get less rewards, but it's still possible to fight other players at home. And with all this trouble, is it even worth it? So we think that it is, and players do as well. So these are just a few comments that we get. Is people say that it's super interactive, run down the street in the middle of the night with no shoes on to battle a new monster, or very creative, makes you get off the couch, kids love it, or I think that is the best monster game app I ever played. So when you read those comments, you realize that these games are interesting to people, and you got to create more of them to the world. And the takeaway is that mobile is obviously perfect for augmented reality and location-based games, but you have to take into account a lot of challenges and things that it introduces. So technical integration, game design, and you also have to be flexible and creative to shift your thinking and change what you might have learned before from other games. And you should always look for the golden mean, so use it, but don't overuse it in your games. So thank you.
Great. Questions from the audience? I'm looking for a question. Okay, so I'm going to fire one over. One of the things that when you had the slide showing the recommendations of what you should do and not do, and particularly not having an AR mode, but going to a virtual fight mode. Yeah. It actually replicated my own playing habits with Pokemon Go. For instance, I was tired of the AR mode that they had. I was actually always finding it better to just fight in virtual mode and not even looking at the screen the way it was. So were there any other sorts of insights that you haven't revealed yet that you've discovered through the game releases that you've had? Did you see more pickup when you were in virtual mode or so forth? I'm just trying to get a sense of like what more data do you have from when to use AR and what not to use AR?
Well, there are smaller things that we've discovered, but I wouldn't say that there's something relatively important or huge that I could add to the points that I've already said. Of course, I could talk about those points for a longer time, but I think it also depends on each game. So when you make one game, you have to design it in one way, and the other one is a bit different. So the main point that I would like to say is that you just have to think about augmented reality when designing the game, and just be creative and experiment a lot. And there are no specific points that can be used in each augmented reality game. So.
Okay. With the question of location, you made the point that, okay, players don't necessarily want to walk, and there's weather conditions and so forth. Is the part of the game design that you're looking at the idea that location has many parameters, be it, okay, static, we're in a static location inside or not moving, or even in a cafe, but we're in Paris, we have the Eiffel Tower nearby,
Yeah.
or we're actually in a location where we're actually doing a lot of walking. Like, how detailed or granular are you using location as a gameplay or game design mechanism?
Well, actually, frankly, you shouldn't use specific locations that much because a lot of players are playing in villages or even in deserts or somewhere else. So if you always make gameplay tied to known places or cities or something like that, that is not very good because then you don't care about a lot of your players. So what we did is we actually randomly generate portals for each player. So wherever you are, you will be able to play with the same density of monsters. And the other thing is that we generate monsters only in accessible areas. So we don't put them in buildings because you will probably not be able to enter a building randomly. We don't generate them on streets so that kids won't go into a street randomly and stuff like that. So we are using location, we are using the specific spots, but we are actually trying to avoid tying it to specific cities or specific known places.
Okay, splendid. Any other?